day, everyone. I'm Jolet Ribala, and please let me introduce my lovely groupmates. So, we will tackle the topic discounted cash flow. So, the first person who will discuss what is discounted cash flow, we have Hazel Hinayon. Next, yours truly and Karen Jeans 1, who will discuss the net cash flow to the firm and net cash flow to equity. Next, we have Elvision Mangalao and Emma Escames, who will tackle the terminal value. Next, we have Jean Orais and Roxanne Byong, who will tackle the financial models. And lastly, the A's of our team, we have Edelyn Fuentes, the components of financial model. So without further ado, let's get on to it.
Good day, everyone. I am Hazel Hinayon, the first reporter of the Group 3. So we will discuss about the discounted cash flow. So what is discounted cash flow? So discounted cash flow is a finance method to value a security, project, company, or asset using the time value of money. So it is a type of financial model that determines whether an investment is worthwhile based on future cash flow. So in financial management, discounted cash flow has been discussed to determine the value of the investment opportunity by determining the actual cash generated by a particular asset. In CFAs, the cash flow are represented and analyzed based on their success and activities which categorize as operating, investing, and financing. So what is net cash flow? So net cash flow refers to the amount of cash available for distribution to both debt and equity claims of the business or assets. Net cash flow is a profitability metric that represents the amount of money produced or lost of a business by a business during a given period. So for GCBO or going concern business operation, net cash flow generated will be based on the cash flow from investing and operating activities. So net cash flow is preferred of basis of valuation if any of the following conditions are present. So company does not pay dividends. So company should pay dividends because it is listed in the cash flow from financing activities section. So this part of the cash flow show all the business financing activities including the dividends. Second is company pays dividend but the amount paid out significantly differ from its capacity to pay dividends. So when we say dividends, it is a cash payment to investor as a reward from owning the stock. So if the company cannot pay the amount dividend, it will become a preferred dividend. It is the dividend allocated and paid on a company's preferred shares. So number 3 is net cash flow and profit are aligned within in a reasonable forecast period. So number 4, investor has a control perspective. If an investor can exert control over a company dividend, then can be adjusted based on the decision of the controlling investor. So using the net cash over cash flow concept are more advantages and valuation activity since the metric can be used as DCF model. So first is EBITDA and EBIT are both metrics that are before taxes. So cash flow available to investors should be after satisfying tax requirement of the government. So it is a measure of financial performance that show a company ability to generate cash from its operation. So it is calculated by adding the non-cash charges such as amortization, depreciation, restricting cost, and impairment to net income. So number 2 is EBITDA and EBIT do not consider differences in capital structures. Since it does not capture interest payment, dividend, for preference shares and funds sourced from bondholders to fund additional investment. The number 3 is all these measures also do not consider reinvestment of cash flow. So it made into firm for additional working capital and fixed asset investment that is necessary to maximize the long-term stability of the business. In valuation, analysts finding analyzing cash flow from its sources helpful in understanding the following. First is source of financing for needed investment. So, our investment internally funded by cash generated from operation or debt equity. So, the main source of financing are retained earnings, debt capital, and equity capital. So, company used retained earnings from business operations to expand or to distribute dividends to the shareholders. Business raise funds by borrowing privately from bank. Then second is refinanced on debt is financing. So it occurs when a firm sell fixed assets, income products such as bonds, bills, and notes. And it is an excellent strategy, especially for expanding companies. However, it can have a problem for a firm if the cash from operation is insufficient to repay the existing obligations. The number 3 is the quality of earnings, so significant between cash flow and income. So this may indicate earnings that's not converted of cash easily, suggesting low qualities. So this refer to the proportion of income attributable to the core operating activities of a business. So there are 2 levels of net cash flow. So net cash flow to the firm and net cash flow to equity. So net cash flow to the firm is the amount made available to debt and equity claims against the company. Then second is represent the amount of cash flow made available to the equity stakeholders after deducting the net debt or the outstanding liabilities to the creditors less available cash balance of the company.
So to further discuss the net cash flow to the firm, it refers to the cash flow available to the partners who supplied capital, such as lenders and shareholders. After paying all operating expenses, including taxes, and investing in capital expenditures and working capital as required by business needs. So the cash flow being considered here is operating cash flow and is generated by using the operating assets of the firm. If there are other assets like cash, marketable securities, or any kind of investments which are not used in day-to-day operations, their discounted present value needs to be added separately to the value of the firm, as they are not considered in the free cash flow to the firm metric. Net cash flow only capture items that are directly related to the operating and investing activities of the business. Consequently, net cash flow excludes items associated with financing activities. Why? Kaya nga ito di siya makita sa net cash flow to equity. And the net cash flows to the firm can be computed or derived using the following approaches. First, we have based from net income or indirect approach. Next, from statement of cash flow. And lastly, from earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So for now, let us discuss the net cash flows to the firm based from net income or indirect approach. So let us discuss each of these items to better understand what they are. So let's have the net income available to common shareholders. So net income available to common shareholders are the basic measure of a firm's profitability, which refers to the bottom line figure in an income statement. So if the better example siguro ani is our feasibility study. So if you can remember, while we are preparing our income statement, we are deducting all costs, expenses, depreciation, amortization, interest, taxes, and dividends to preferred shareholders in order to come up the net income available to common shareholders. So this is an accounting measure, meaning that non-cash items like depreciation and amortization is also included as a deduction to arrive at net income. However, this measure does not include changes in the working capital, nor capital investments made during the specific period, which significantly affects a firm's cash flows. Next, we have the non-cash charges. This will be added to the net income. So it pertains to non-cash items that are included in the computation of net income. Analysts usually look at the statement of cash flows to validate potential non-cash charges. If amount in the net income statement does not match amount reflected in the cash flow statement, it can be indicative that a portion of that expense is non-cash. So the common non-cash items are the following. We have depreciation and amortization. So when a firm acquires a fixed asset like equipment or intangible asset, the initial cash flow is made at point of acquisition and is presented in the balance sheet. In succeeding periods, a portion of the initial cash outflow is recorded as depreciation and amortization, which reduces net income, despite not having an actual cash outflow. As a result, this should be added back to arrive at the real cash flow. Next, restructuring charges. This refers to the change in the organizational structure or business model of a company adapt to changing economic climate or business needs. So most restructuring involves involuntary separation of employees. As a result, the restructuring requires the company to pay them severance pay. Severance pay should comply with the minimum requirements set in the Labor Code of the Philippines. Severance pays are normally outright cash outflows. So the company may also need to write down in value of pension assets or reversal of previous accruals as a result of the restructuring activity. This is usually recorded as part of the restructuring expenses or income in the income statement. However, since there are no cash outlays involved in write-downs, this should be added back to net income to get NCF. Next, we have provisions for doubtful accounts. These are estimated amount to be included for the customer's inability to pay on time, which is cumulatively accounted under the statement of financial position reported against the accounts receivable, since these amounts represent the value that may have probability of collection but not yet written off, meaning there is a positive chance that it can still be collected, then it should be added back to the net income attributable to common. The next item included to our formula is the after-tax interest expense. So this interest expense is a cash flow intended for the debt providers. In the Philippines, interest expense is a tax-deductible expense for the company. This means that when the company pays interest, it reduces tax to be paid. Hence, the cash outflow is the amount of interest expense less any tax savings. After-tax interest expense is added back to the net income since the objective of NCF is to measure the cash flows associated with the operating activity of the business. The impact of financing should be neutralized to arrive at the real business value based on its operations. Next, we have the working capital adjustment, also known as working capital. This item represents the net income in current assets such as receivables and inventory, reduced by current liabilities like payables. So the amount captured is based on the movements in these accounts from prior years. Companies do not need to pay for taxes when they are investing in their operating capital. On the other hand, if current assets requirement decline, this means that more cash is available to debt and equity providers, thus added back. For NCF and valuation purposes, movements in cash, marketable securities, short-term notes payable, and current portion of long-term debt is excluded in the computation. Cash is excluded since the purpose of the NCF exercise is to identify what is the real cash flow of the business. Marketable securities are also excluded since these are not directly linked to operations. On the other hand, notes payable and current portion of long-term debt are excluded since they are associated with the financing side of the business. And lastly, we have the investment in fixed capital. This pertains to cash flows made to purchase or pay for capital expenditures that are required to support existing and future operating needs. Capital expenditures range from property, plant, and equipment necessary for production requirements to intangible assets like trademark, patents, and copyrights. Firms expect that they will repeatedly benefits for more than 1 year as a result of these investments. So the investments in fixed capital assumes that the project's finance acceptable has positive net present value. When gap exists between amount of capital investment and depreciation, this is usually related to the growth profile of the company. Companies expecting high growth tend to report high net capital expenditures compared to earnings, while low growth companies usually have negative net capital expenditures. Cash paid for acquisition of a new business falls into this category. The full purchase amount reduces the net cash flow in the year of acquisition. If the acquisition involves non-cash settlement, analysts should be careful in capturing only portion denominated in cash as reduction to net cash flows. On the other hand, if there are sale of capital expenditures that occur, this should be added back to the net cash flow. Hence, net investments in fixed capital is deducted to arrive at net cash flow computation. A negative net investment signifies that firm received cash since it sold more assets than it purchased for the year. Analysts should use the statement of cash flows to analyze cash flows related to fixed capitals. These are instances when companies may obtain fixed capital in exchange of shares, which doesn't necessarily have impact to cash flows. Even though transactions might not be non-cash for the current year, analysts should be careful in forecasting future fixed capital investments, especially if it will require cash outlays. Moving on, so the second approach in arriving the net cash flow to the firm, we have the statement of cash flows. So this is our formula that we will use in arriving the net cash flows to the firm. So if mabantayan na pod ninyo, di ba wala na pod ang financing? Because again, nga to di makita sa equity. So, kasabot naman siguro taon sa na operating, investing, o financing, di ba? Pero mag-recap lamang gyapon ta. So, cash flow from operating activities. This represents how much cash the company generated from its operation. This shows how much cash is received from customers and how much cash outlays are paid to vendors. This also captures changes in current assets and current liabilities. Normally, this is computed from net income by considering non-cash items and working capital changes. This is considered in computing for NCFF. Next, we have cash flow from investing activities. This represents how much cash is disbursed for investments in long-term assets like property, plant, and equipment and strategic investments in other companies. This is considered in computing for NCFF. If this section reflects transactions involving financial assets, this should be excluded. And lastly, cash flow from financing activities. This represents how much cash was raised to finance the company. So again, this is not included in the net cash flow to the firm. Should be mindful how interest and dividends are classified in the statement of cash flows. IFRS allows interest and dividends received to be classified under operating or investing activities, while interest and dividends paid out is placed under operating or financing activities. One-time or extraordinary items should also be eliminated from the computation.
So this is the third approach based on EBITDA. So stands for earnings before interests, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, but net of taxes. Okay? And then we will add the tax savings on non-cash charges. Add or less the working capital adjustments and less investment in fixed capital for us to arrive at the net cash flows to the firm. Okay, so here we are considering the EBITDA, but please take note that net of taxes. So that's it for the net cash flow to the firm. Now let's proceed to the next topic, which is the net cash flow to equity. Okay, so I'm gonna explain what is net cash flow to equity or NCFE. Okay, so when we say NFCE, it refers to cash available for common equity participants or shareholders, and only after paying the operating expenses, satisfying operating and fixed capital requirements. So remember the adjustments and also the settling cash flow transactions involving debt providers and preferred shareholders. So here in debt providers and preferred shareholders, these are the additional items that can be considered in the formulas. Okay, so what else? Okay, so the NCFE can simply be computed from the NCFF by considering items related to lenders and preferred shareholders. So take note that we consider items that are related and preferred shareholders because the NCFE is cash available to who? To common equity participants and to equity shareholders. NCFE signifies the level of available cash that a business can freely declare as dividends to its common shareholders. So, this is the level of available cash nga pwede i-declare sa mga common shareholders. That is why ibawas or i-consider ang mga preferred shareholders para whatever is left mao to ang available cash nga pwede i-declare as dividends sa mga common shareholders. So, this is the formula or the guide. So, magikan sa NCFF and then after considering the following, mo na to nga mag-add og proceeds from borrowings, less debt service, add proceeds from preferred share issuances, less dividends on preferred shares. And then mo to nga, we will get the NCFE. Allow me to explain the adjustments. So first, add proceeds from borrowings. So if we say add proceeds from borrowings, this is related to cash flow from financing activities. Okay, so because as what we remember in NCFF, we didn't include the cash flow from financing. So dili si Jama consider ang proceeds from borrowing simply kung unsa imong nadawat sa imong gi-utang. Since ang NCFF did not include items related to financing, it did not capture the cash received by the company from lenders. So, dili siya na-capture. Since the cash from the borrowing is with the company already, ma-add back na siya to NCFF para ma-include na siya sa cash flow available for common shareholders. And of course, ibawas ang debt service. And this debt service is the cost of financing total amount to service the loans or debt financing, and this includes the loan repayment and the interest expense, net of income tax benefit. And here, proceeds from preferred shares. So, equity gihapon ni siya pero as another form of financing. Okay, so ibawas sa sadya because NCFF is available to ordinary shareholders. So, it must also be factored in the calculation of the net cash flows available to equity. Okay, so, and then, of course, ibawas ang mga dividends attributable sa preferred shareholders because it is cost of capital, the dividend. This must be incorporated in the calculation as a reduction of the NCFE. And then, muna to siya, makuha na ang NCFE or ang net cash flow to equity. Before discussing the terminal value, the next topic, there are three approaches based from net income, from statement of cash flows, from earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So, we can still use this sa NCFE because if this is our formula sa based on net income, i-add na siya sa ubos. So, add proceeds from borrowings minus debt service, add proceeds from preferred shares minus dividends, then naana kay NCFE. And so, from statement of cash flows, i-add gihapon siya, add proceeds from borrowings minus debt service, add proceeds from preferred shares minus dividends, then naana kay NCFE. And lastly, sa based from earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, or EBITDA, maghihapon ang button, add minus, and then you will get the NCFE. So, that's it for the net cash flow to equity.
Good day everyone, I am Elvijan Mangalaw and I will be discussing the terminal value. So first, let me define first what is a terminal value. So terminal value represents the value of the company in perpetuity or in a going concern environment. So when we say perpetuity, it also referred or it is synonyms to the word infinity. So in other words, terminal value is the value of an asset, business, or project beyond the forecasted period when future cash flows can be estimated. Terminal value assumes a business will grow at a set growth rate forever after the forecast period. Recently, or from the previous video, discuss na ang DCF or the discounted cash flow. So, basically, it has two major components, which is first, the forecasted period, and the second is the terminal value, which is our topic now. So, forecast period is usually about 3 to 5 years. Anything longer than that, and the accuracy of the projection suffers. So, this is where calculating terminal value becomes important. Na-encounter na nato ni nga topic or the word discounted cash flow from our feasibility study. And dito, ang ato rang i-calculate is the payback of our business from 1 to 5 years. There is a terminal value, ang kadtong beyond adto or the 6 years until infinity nga cash flows is estimated using the terminal value in order to get the exact amount. So next slide, we have here the basis of terminal value. So actually, we have 4 bases of terminal value. First is the liquidation value. Second is the estimated perpetual value. The third is the constant growth. And fourth is the scientific estimate. First is the liquidation value. So liquidation value, some analysts find that the terminal value be based on the estimated salvage value of the assets. I will not furtherly discuss this one because it has been already discussed in the previous videos or in the chapter 3. So, proceed na ta to the second basis of terminal value, which is the estimated perpetual value. So, farthest cash flows you can estimate divided by the cost of capital less the growth rate. Estimated perpetual value can be calculated using the formula. So, we have here terminal value equals farthest net cash flows all over the cost of capital minus the growth rate. We have here an example of the estimated perpetual value. So, a Filipino company is expecting for 15% returns for a venture and assumes that their net cash flows for the next 5 years are as follows. So, we have here the year 1 to 5, and then the net cash flows for the first year is 5 million. For the second year is 5,500,000. For the third year is 6,050,000. And then for the fourth year, we have 6,660,000, and for the fifth year, we have 7,320,000. So, in the given illustration, you may note that the net cash flows are growing annually. So, as we can see in the illustration nga, nag-anam siya og kataas. Diba? Visible man siya sa illustration. And then, assuming this is a GCBO is expected that the net cash flows will behave on a normal trend. So, the growth rate is computed using compounded annual growth rate formula. So, ato sang kuhaon ang growth rate para ma-determine kung pila ang value sa katong farthest nga cash flow. Since kay mo may gamiton sa formula, we have here the G is equal to the net cash flows at the beginning of our latest net cash flows, and then it will be multiplied by 1 over latest time minus 1, and then ang result na is E minus ito sa 1 and then multiplied by 100%. So, substituting the given figures, the growth is computed as follows. So, G is equal to nang distribute the net cash flows at the beginning. So, as we can see in the illustration showed earlier, the net cash flows at the beginning is 7.32 over the latest net cash flows, which is 5. And then, multiplied by 1 over 5 minus 1. And then minus 1, ang result of this is minus 1 multiplied by 100%. So, now, G is equal to 1.10 minus 1 multiplied by 100%. So, ang atong growth rate na karon is 10%. So, since the growth rate is 10%, it will be applied on the farthest cash flows. So, ato na itong ma-determine na ito ang value sa farthest cash flow. Since on the fifth year, cash flow is equivalent to 7.32. So, as we can see in the previous illustration, nga, ang value niya is 7.32. So, ato nang i-multiply into sa 10%, so, it will be equal to 0.732, and then we're going to add back that. So 0.732 plus 7.32, it is now equal to 8.05. So muna niya ang atong farthest cash flow. So muna niya atong gamiton sa formula sa terminal value. Now we can already calculate the terminal value. So using the formula, terminal value is equal to the farthest net cash flow minus the R or the cost of capital minus G or the growth rate. So ato nang gi-alis na ng value sa farthest net cash flow into 8.5. So muna ni ang hitabo. So terminal value is equal to 8.05 minus sa 15% nga ilang gi-assume ganiha based on the illustration, and then minus the 10% nga atong nakuha ganiha from the previous nga formula katong gikuha na to ang growth rate 10%. So terminal value is equal to 8.5 over 5%. From the 15% minus 10% is equal to 5%. And then, terminal value is equal to 8.05 over 5% is equal to 161. So, ang atong terminal value now is 161 pesos. But, in some cases po, where the historical growth pattern is undetermined, some analysts only consider the cost of capital of the required return to determine the terminal value. So instead of getting the growth rate nga atong gikuha katong 10%, so they will only be using katong 15% nga cost of capital nila nga ilang gi-assume. So in the given illustration, you may note that the difference on the terminal value, as we can see here in the solution, TV is equal to 8.05 over 15%. So, we can observe here nga wala nila gi-appeal ang katong nakuha nga growth rate, which is 10%. So, 8.05 divided by 15%, it is equal to 53.66. So, mo na ang terminal value actually. So, as we can observe in the result, the terminal value in this case is more conservative by about 107 pesos. And then let's go on to the next basis of terminal value, constant growth. This growth rate is a proxy for the required return for a specific investment, especially if the growth is constant and significant. Because it is a challenge for some valuators to determine the amount of required return for a specific type of asset or investment. So instead, they use the growth as a proxy na. And then next is the scientific estimates. Some valuators used guesstimates, so it cannot be prevented because in the end, equity values will still be based on negotiation. Other valuators, especially those with vast experience already in some types of investments, they use as other bases for them to determine the reasonable terminal value. To end my discussion about terminal value, actually, there is no perfect approach to determine the terminal value. Risk-averse investors don't consider the terminal value in their valuation. The differences in their appreciation and the determination or even the inclusion of their terminal value is dependent on the risk appetite. And then again, the valuation method will only serve as a reference to determine the reasonable value for the equity or the asset being purchased. So this is why negotiation plays a key role in finalizing the determined value. That's all. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am MR Escames and I am here to further discuss the topic other inputs and the net cash flows. The DCF analysis is most applicable to use when the following are available. First, there is validated operational and financial information. Second, there is reasonable appropriated cost of capital or appropriated required rate of return. And third, there is new quantifiable information. In the example, Baguettes Corporation, the information has projected to generate revenues, cash operating expenses, and corresponding tax payments for the next 5 years. So as you can see in the table, there is revenue, cash operating expenses, taxes, working capital adjustments that have the amount for 5 years. So the investment in fixed capital that was purchased and invested in the company amounted to 100 million pesos and to be financed by 60% from the loan borrowing with an annual interest of 10% payable equally in 5 years. So the first payment will due after 1 year and 10% of preferred shares with 8% coupon rate. So if you are going to purchase 50% of Baguettes Corporation, assuming a 15% required return, how much would you be willing to pay? So to solve, as you can see in the table in the right side, Baguettes Corporation discounted cash flow analysis. So as you can see, the Baguettes Corporation revenue comprises from year 1 to year 5, 92.88, 97.52, 102.40, and 107.52, and for year 5, 112.90. Take note that the cash operating expenses and the tax payments will be deducted from the revenue, and the working capital adjustments will either be added or deducted depending if the amount is positive or negative. So to calculate, we can get the net cash flows of each year. And for year 1, the net cash flows is 36.29, for year 2, 38.47, for year 3, 40.80, and for year 4, 43.25, and lastly, year 5, 45.86. The investment in fixed capital, as you can see in the left side, it is amounted to 100 million pesos, will also be deducted. So the terminal value will be calculated using the terminal value formula. So if you will go over below to the notes to analysis, you can see that the 481.50 will be derived. So 45.86 from year 5 will be multiplied by 1 plus 5% divided by 15% minus 5%. And then it will result to 48.15 divided by 10% to get the 481.50 pesos. So the 481.50 will be deducted from the net cash flow of year 5 to derive the amount of 435.64. And then from the proceeds from borrowing, as you will go over to the left side, it is from the 60% loan borrowing, and the 100 million times 60% will be equal to 60,000. And the debt services will also be deducted, and the proceeds from preferred share will be added, and the dividends to preferred share will be deducted. And to calculate the net cash flows added by proceeds from borrowing less debt service added by proceeds from preferred share less dividends to get the amount of the net cash flows to equity. For year 1, the amount is 51.11, for year 2, 53.60, for year 3, 56.25, year 4, 59.5, and year 5, 419.45. The discount factor, the amount will be multiplied to the net cash flows equity to arrive the amount for the discounted net cash flows for the 5 years. The amount of the discounted net cash flows from year 5 to year 1 will be deducted to come up with the amount of the equity value. So for year 5, 208.54 will be deducted by year 4, amounting to 33.77, minus year 3, 36.99, minus year 2, 40.53, minus year 1, 44.45, and minus 30 to get the 22.80 equity value. So that's pretty much it. Thank you for listening for my discussion about the other inputs in the net cash flows, and for the example of Baguettes Corporation until the calculations of the net cash flows and equity value. Thank you and God bless.
Financial models in discounted cash flows analysis. Financial modeling is a sophisticated and confidential activity in a company or for an analyst. Financial modeling is used to determine the value of opportunities, validate ballpark estimates, and determine impairments. Financial modelers have extensive financial acumen and vast knowledge and experience. Financial modelers normally are economists, financial managers, and accountants. Management accountants are good candidates for this role given their active ability to understand operational models and design long-term financial strategies. In order to develop financial models, the following steps needs to be observed. First, gather historical information and references. Historical information must be made available before the financial model is to be constructed. Historical information may be generated from but not limited to the following: audited financial statements, corporate disclosures, contracts, and peer information. Audited financial statements are essential for assessing the future of a company based on its historical performance. They include statements of income, financial position, cash flows, and changes in stockholders' equity. Notes to the financial statements provide important disclosures and risks. Corporate disclosures provide context for future plans and strategies, allowing analysts and financial modelers to identify risks and quantify them. Peer information and public information are essential inputs to the financial model, providing context and supporting risk. The financial model must be able to filter out relevant and reliable information as well as materiality to ensure only relevant items are considered in the valuation. Second, establish drivers for growth and assumptions. Once all relevant information was gathered and validated, drivers and assumptions can be established by conducting financial analysis. Drivers are suggested to be those validated and is represented by authorities like government or expert. Growth drivers are normally based on population since most of the businesses are consumer goods. Financial ratios may be used as tools to determine the growth drivers and assumptions. Trend analysis will also help you establish the trajectory of growth pattern. The financial modeler must assess whether the company can sustain the pattern, otherwise it is conservative to assume a less aggressive growth. Normally, the weighted growth pattern will be considered in the long-term financial perspective. It must be assessed whether the average year-on-year growth will be sustained or may be surpassed. To illustrate, ABC Company's historical production grows 10% per year. It is expected that in the next 5 years, the probability are as follows. We have scenario ABC, any rate 5%, 10%, and 15% respectively, with probability of 10%, F 10%, and 15%. With the given information, the weighted average growth rate to be used is 12% computed as following situation. The financial modeler can safely use the 12% for projecting sales moving forward. Hence, if the sales for this year was reported to 8,500 units, then under the average sales computed will result to 9,520 units sold.
This financial model is determining the reasonable cost of capital. When we say cost of capital is the minimum rate of return or profit a company must earn before generating value. It's calculated by a business accounting department to determine financial risk and whether an investment is justified. The cost of capital measures the cost that a business incurs to finance its operations. It measures the cost of borrowing money from creditors or raising it from investors through equity financing compared to the expected return on an investment. So, in determining the reasonable cost of capital, the financial modeler must be able to use the appropriate parameters for the company. Generally, cost of debt and cost of equity are weighted to determine the cost of capital reasonable for the valuation. So next, financial model is to apply the formulae to compute for the value. Normally, in financial modeling, DCF is used to calculate for the value. Since most information are already available in financial model, it can be easier to use other financial capital budgeting techniques like internal rate of return, profitability index, and etc. For example, Delight Bakery Incorporated projected volume of pandesal to be sold in year 1 is 138,915 units, assuming 5% growth every year and the estimated required return of 10%. The pandesal is sold at 15 pesos per unit with a cash net income margin of 20%. Delight's equipment is capable of producing the volume required for 10 years. It was noted that the company has outstanding debt of 500,000. Using the inputs, the financial model may be presented through. So makita diha sa kanang makita nga ang format, so the volume is increasing by 5% every year. So in year 1, the product unit is 138,915 times 5%, so the answer for in year 2 is 145,861,000. So the price per unit is 15 pesos. So enable to find the revenue, i-times rang volume o ang price. So the revenue for the year 1 is 2,083,725. And the cash net income margin is 20%. So, i-times na siya sa revenue para makuha ang cash net income. So, the answer is 416,745. And then, the discount factor is 10%. So, every year, para makuha ang discount factor in year 1, imura nang i-times ang 1 divided by 1.1. So, the answer is 0.91. So, in the year 2, ang discount factor niya is 1 divided by 1.2. So, the enterprise value is 1,729,742.10. I-plus na nimo ang discounted net cash flows from year 1 to year 5. So, the equity value is 1,229,742.10. And last financial model is make scenarios and sensitivity analysis based on the results. The advantage of having a financial model is that you can easily tweak the given information and get the results immediately. For instance, in the previous illustration, the cost of capital use is 10%. How about if we find that cost of capital will be 12% or 15%? What will be the enterprise value? If this is the case, we need to design the financial model to accommodate this through the use of data table features in Microsoft Excel. First, design a table where the values will be inputted. Next, select the table we prepared by highlighting cells C17 to D19. And you go to the Data tab and go to What If Analysis and select Data Table. Data Table dialog box will appear and ask you to enter the inputs. Since the table we are doing provides for a columnar input, then we'll input C17 in the column input and click OK. Then the result will now be shown to you in the table. It will be easier for you to determine which value to use. Since in our example, the outstanding debt is 500,000, then you have to play in the range of 1.2 million to 1.02 million. The scenarios will be developed based on the set of possible occurrences like level of operating expense, mode of operations, capital expenditures, development period. Emerging trend is having a risk-based valuation wherein major systematic risk is incorporate such as climate change, war, economic sabotage, pandemic. Sensitivity analysis is almost similar with scenario modeling. The difference is that sensitivity analysis will have to select a driver or few drivers, ceteris paribus, and check the degree of change it will cause to the results. Sensitivity analysis is useful exercise in developing ballpark estimates.
I will going to report the components of financial model. Financial model should be understood
understandable, printable, and auditable. So, financial model also need to be designed in a way that the investor or the client of the analyst or the proponent themselves can understand the dynamics and follow the drivers to enable them to have a better appreciation and sound judgment of the results. So, financial models are just a guide for the investor or even the sellers of investment to determine the reasonable value. There are 5 components of financial model when using a Microsoft Excel. First is a title page, data key results, assumption sheet, pro forma financial statements, and supporting schedule. First is title page. Title page provides an overview on the project being valued or assessed. The title page includes also necessary information to secure the proprietary rights of the modeler or the firm or he or she is working with. It may also include data cutoff to serve as a guide to the readers. Next is the data key results. This sheet summarizes the result of the study. This will serve as the dashboard to enable the modelers to analyze the results and to facilitate the reader's appreciation on the results of the project. This also facilitates the preparation of pertinent reports. The data key results also contains the valuation results, scenarios, and sensitivity analysis. Graphs can also be found in this sheet. Next is the assumption sheet. Assumption sheet, this sheet summarizes the assumption used in the model. So the assumption sheet, normally an input sheet where all inputs should be made. The information that can be found in this sheet must be linked to all the output sheets like pro forma financial statement, supporting schedules, and data key results. Next is the pro forma financial statement. Pro forma financial statement, this presents the 3 components of financial statement, namely the statement of income, statement of financial position, and statement of cash flows. In this sheet, you can also find some key financial ratios, particularly those that has to do with financial performance and efficiency ratios. Some modelers also find it convenient to have their valuation computation be done in this sheet since the inputs of cash flows are already available here. Next is the supporting schedules. Supporting schedule, this is like a subsidiary ledger which provides supporting computation to the components of the pro forma financial statement. There is no limit for the supporting schedule. The only challenge is that the electronic financial models consume large amount of data because of the supporting schedules.